Hello and welcome to the Passenger Seat Podcast, a podcast designed to fill your passenger seat with chat about classic cars, all recorded from my 1968 Morris Minor Peggy. I'm Becca and today I'm on my first commute back home after my first day back at work after my annual leave. And it's always kind of one of the worst commutes that you'll do, that first one after having a nice big chunk of annual leave off. And so I thought, what way to make it better than to talk to you guys about my holiday to the Netherlands in Peggy and answer some of the questions that I had come through over on Instagram and here on YouTube. If you have any more questions after today's podcast, by all means put them down in the comments and I will get to them there. Or message me over on social media and I will answer you there as well. So a few options there for you, but today I'm going to answer some of the questions that I got. Starting off with some of the more practical questions that I received and then going on to kind of some of the more broader, I guess, trip summary questions that I got. Now, brilliantly, as I'm sat at a roundabout, we have a question about roundabouts from Robert Green over on YouTube, and he asked whether I found roundabouts more difficult going on the opposite side of the road, how I got to grips to it, because it can be quite confusing when it's kind of the opposite side to what you're used to. And actually, once I got to normal roundabouts, I found it quite straightforward. I was using Google Maps for most of my driving, and they show you kind of, okay, get into this lane and go this way around. So it's pretty difficult to forget which way you're supposed to go round. You get in the hang of it. The Netherlands roundabouts have like curbs and stuff within them as well. So as long as you're in the right lane, it really does guide you round and into the right place and stuff like that. But the first couple of roundabouts after the Hook of Holland port are a little bit confusing because they're not really straightforward roundabouts. They're the sort of roundabouts where you can go straight over, or kind of depending on where traffic lights lead you in quite a variety of different ways. And that was quite confusing because I ended up in the wrong lane because I wasn't quite sure what I was doing, and it was quite difficult to work it out from Google Maps on that particular one. But other than that, I think I got to grips with driving on the opposite side of the road pretty quickly. Found driving over there incredibly enjoyable. I haven't stopped talking about how much I enjoyed driving over there since I got back, really. And a lot of the roads around where I live are supposedly drained in exactly the same way a lot of Holland was, by Dutch people back in the 1600s, and yet are horrific for kind of subsidence and big dips and stuff like that. But it was a brilliant driving experience over there. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and whilst the roads aren't set up with cars in mind in the first place, because that's not what they've designed them for, especially a lot of the back roads that we did, it was still a thoroughly enjoyable experience. What I would say is that when I went to overtake on some of the big highways, I found it somewhat difficult to kind of see what was coming up. Obviously, in a Morris Minor, you've got a huge amount of visibility and things like that. But regardless of that, it was a little bit tricky to kind of see what was coming up behind me, because my wing mirror on that side isn't particularly useful to me even in this country. But that's not always a problem because I've got this wing mirror and that's where I'm doing most of my pulling out. But all that meant was making better use of my passenger, asking Jamie to be kind of a second set of eyes and keeping an eye out for anything if I decided I wanted to pull out. But overall, it was brilliant. I love driving over there. I wish we'd done a little bit more of it, but you don't need to, because even places that looked really far away on the map, because their road system is so well set up and also so direct and quite fast moving, even though technically when you transfer it back to miles per hour, you're going slower on those highways than you would on the motorways over here, you kind of feel like you get places a lot faster, and places that were quite far apart by like UK standards were quite easy to get to, and we found ourselves getting there quite quickly and with relatively low mileage or kilometerage. Matty over on Instagram, the legendary House of 8 Wheels, I think her Instagram tag is, asked about petrol costs. We were warned by our friends that had been over to the Netherlands not that long beforehand that petrol costs over there were quite expensive, so we just made sure that we filled up. Literally, there's a petrol station right next to the port, and whilst they probably are aware that some people are doing that and so the prices are a little bit more expensive, it meant that we went over there with a full tank of fuel, and we only topped up a couple of times. A little bit of advice that we got from our friends was that whilst E5 seems readily available, it's not used as frequently by people who live over there, so can be a bit stale in the tanks, particularly if you are out in the middle of nowhere. So rather than drain your tank completely, fill your tank up with little bits periodically. And so we got it down to, I think, 3/4 of a tank, topped it up, and then down to half a tank and topped it up, just to make sure that there was still kind of a little bit of British fuel in there, because it's more frequently used, a little bit fresher. I also had a little jerry can in the boot if I needed it, but I didn't actually need it in the end. And it is expensive compared to UK prices. So for example, I've literally just filled up before I set off, and it was, I think, £1.44 a litre at my local Sainsbury's for E5. Over there it was about €2.10 was about what I paid at the 2 stops that I made, which works out at about 1.97 in British pounds. So quite a chunk more expensive, but also you're going at more reasonable speeds on the highways, you're still getting to places a lot faster. So I think I got quite reasonable fuel economy over there, all things considered. So more expensive for sure, but not the most expensive thing you will spend money on if you take a car over, as we'll get onto in the next question. So Harry Richmond over on Instagram also asked about an expense attached to taking a car over, which is parking. And this was not something I thought of, and Harry probably wouldn't have thought of it either if I hadn't have told him the shocking amount of money that I spent on parking over there, which primed him for the question. So we were over from Sunday the 16th of July through to Monday the 24th of July, and in that time we spent approximately €300 on parking, and this is purely because parking is so expensive, but also because you pay parking in places that as a British person you might not expect to pay parking. So for example, obviously when we're booking our hotel, we look for a hotel that has parking available, because we need somewhere to park the car that we're taking over. But what we didn't see or find on the sites that we used to book the hotels was that parking is available but at an additional cost. So we only found that out in kind of the week or so beforehand, when those hotels emailed us with some kind of check-in information and other kind of pre-visit information. So our first hotel was €17.50 a night for parking, well, for a day. So if you left your car there for the whole day, or if you, as I did, kind of took it out at I think it was like 10, 11 o'clock most days, and then brought it back at 4 o'clock, didn't really matter. It was going to still cost us £17.50 for each day that the car was in there parking. Our second hotel, being by the sea and being in The Hague, had even more expensive parking at something like €45 a night. It was valet parking, and we managed to find somewhere equally as close by that I could park the car in, and was €10 cheaper, and that was again for a day. Then there was some pretty horrendously expensive parking in the centre of Amsterdam on the first day. We went to somewhere that Jamie found on Google as being one of the cheaper places to park your car, but it still cost us about €43 for about 6 or 7 hours whilst we were there. We found a cheaper option on another day, which was to use their park and rides, but even that still came to like €18 because you pay for the parking plus the tickets of anybody who is going in. So there's definitely ways that you can bring the costs down, but it is more expensive than you'd probably be looking at or used to in the UK. But the other thing is that a lot of places that you wouldn't expect to pay parking in the UK, you do pay for it over in the Netherlands, purely because I think they're expecting most people to arrive, especially locals, on bikes, so it's kind of like a little extra tax, I guess, for using a car. So for example, we went to visit Castle de Haar, and that's kind of in the middle of big countryside and stuff like that. It's an attraction. A lot of places like that in the UK, you wouldn't expect to pay parking. You'd expect to be able to park and then buy your tickets, and perhaps that's kind of encompassing a parking cost. But with this, it was very much a case of, this is your cost of entry, this is your cost of parking, and you need to buy this ticket to be able to get out of the car park. Also the Lauman Museum, we obviously got free parking because we were in a car that was over 40 years old and got to park outside the front of the museum, but if we'd have been in a modern car, then that would have cost us €6. Definitely something that if you're trying to go over on with a strict budget of knowing how much you're going to spend on that holiday, something to bear in mind, because it wasn't something that we'd really factored in or thought about. Obviously we've paid for parking on other holidays, but it's been maybe, I don't know, a couple of quid here and there, not big chunks of 40 odd euros. Something that I didn't get asked about, but is quite a useful bit of kind of practical information. If you're taking a car that you want to take photos of in various places, then I would recommend parking up, be that at a park and ride, be that at some more central parking that's more expensive if you can factor that into your budgeting. Go for your kind of walk round on foot, work out those locations that you want to take those photos, and then go to them after you've had your kind of day out on foot. It makes it a lot easier to know where you're headed to. It makes it a lot easier to kind of work out and navigate, to know which areas are actually car friendly, and it all just works a lot smoother. After the first day, I'd set off to Amsterdam just trying to aim for somewhere in the middle to get some photos and stuff before we parked up and get an idea of how the town looked and stuff. But having not known the area, not knowing how busy and also stressful driving it in there was, I very quickly realised that we should just get parked up, walk in, and then we can do that later on in the afternoon. Bradley Perkins over on Instagram asked me about how the locals reacted to Peggy. Did I see many other classics? Did I see any other Morris Minors? So in terms of reactions, we had some great reactions. Jamie being in the side that is traditionally the driver's side over there, when we were on highways and stuff like that, got a lot of people turning and looking at him whilst I was focusing on driving, and he became kind of chief thumbs upper. Because there was a lot of thumbs up and waves coming from the passengers of the local vehicles, so he was in charge of kind of giving thumbs up. We got a couple of comments and stuff from people and some looks whilst we were trying to get photos in the various towns, but not a lot of conversations like you'd have, like, I don't know, at the petrol pumps and stuff over here. We didn't get as many of those, and I don't know if that's because we were quite clearly English and they weren't really sure about having a conversation with us or whatever, or whether it was just a case of they were just admiring the car and carrying on with their day. We obviously had some great conversations with people at the Lauman Museum about the car, and also the people at the ferry and stuff like that. When we got on the first ferry, a Dutch gentleman who took our photo of us with the car said that it was nice to see a little bit of an unusual car on the ferry, assuming he might go on there quite a bit and doesn't see too many of them. Because we didn't see any classic cars that were driving on the way there or on the way back. We did see one on a trailer on the way there. We didn't see huge amounts of classics when we were over towards Amsterdam. All we saw was I think a couple of 2CVs. I think we saw one driving and two parked up. We saw an absolutely glorious Renault Estafette camper van parked up in Amsterdam, an old Fiat Panda, but not a huge amount of older cars really. Lots of big 90s Mercs and stuff like that I think we saw as well, but not a lot of classics or classics on holiday, which I guess was something that we were really looking for. When we went to Castle de Haar on the Sunday, but is over that way, we did see a Citroen DS parked up in the car park when we came back from having been round the castle. We saw a few classics driving around the Hague area. I think it was an MGB, and most surprisingly and excitingly a lovely blue Citroen SM whilst we were sat outside International Criminal Courts of Justice. And on the way to the Lauman, as well as the cars that we saw parked outside the Lauman with ourselves, we did see a Morris Minor at a crossroads, and I waved very frantically as we drove past them. They were at the front of the crossroads. We waved very frantically at them, and we're 99% certain they did not clock us at all. But it was very exciting to see just one Morris Minor over there, and it was over on Netherlands plates, so a local one rather than a tourist one like ourselves. So there was some classic car spotting to be had. I think I thought there would be more, but still a decent amount, I think. Fred over on Instagram, who's at Mud and Rubber, asked me if I did it again, how would I do it differently? So we're moving on to more of the philosophical questions, I think. And honestly, I don't think I would have done anything all that differently, other than the parking up, going and taking the photos. I think there was a lot to be enjoyed about the whole trip. I think it would have been fun to do a bit more driving and stuff than we did, but ultimately we saw everything that we'd gone to see, and it was a holiday which we went in Peggy, rather than it being kind of a driving adventure or overseas trip like that. But there's not a lot I would change. It was fantastic. Peggy performed fantastically. We saw a lot of the countryside that we were in, and I think maybe I would have stopped for a couple more photos in strange places and been a bit braver about taking photos in front of some really beautiful houses and stuff that I saw over there. But I think you just feel a little bit nervous on that first trip over. But there was some really beautiful stuff that we caught whilst we were driving through the countryside. But it's also a bit difficult to stop because of where bicycles and stuff have so much right of way. Alan Mollinson over on YouTube asked me what a highlight of the trip for me was, and the Laumer Museum was exceptional. It does feel like a little bit of an obvious answer, but it was truly a wonderful experience. But also really enjoyed the day where we kind of drove around and explored some of the countryside, and just saw so much of kind of little villages and little towns, and just kind of took in what was out and about, and felt like we were just driving around like you would in this country kind of thing to get to places. I also really enjoyed the view from our hotel in the second hotel. That was absolutely amazing. It was a real treat ourselves moment to go to that hotel and to have that view. But I sat in bed and was able to kind of see it every night and every morning, and it was just gorgeous. So yeah, those are kind of 3 highlights for you. Finally, Steph from iDriver Classic asked me what was my most unexpected experience on the holiday, and other than the unexpected parking tickets and prices, I would say something that was unexpectedly good was the cycle. We went out for, I think it was around 15-something mile round trip around the countryside, and it really gave me an appreciation for how they've set up so much of their infrastructure, and how it works for cars, but it works excellently for your bicycles, how you felt so safe and stuff like that. And you got to, there's a lot of similarities between taking in the countryside on a bicycle in a way that's so safe as you get over in the Netherlands, and the way that you take in the world from a classic car, because you're usually going at a slower pace, got much better visibility and stuff like that. And it was just unexpectedly good. It was exhausting, ached a lot afterwards. The bike that I rode was not a bike that I would go out and buy and recommend, but regardless, it was fantastic and quite an unexpected experience. And the other one was the conversations that we had with people at the Laumer Museum. That was really lovely, really friendly, and just some great conversations with some fellow car enthusiasts in another country. Oh, and obviously just seeing a Citroen SM speeding through the streets of, I don't know if it was actually speeding, but it seemed to go quite rapidly out of the corner of my eye, and then I clocked the back of it in The Hague. That was quite unexpected. You don't expect to see one of those just out and about on a Saturday afternoon in The Hague. So I hope that's answered some people's questions about the trip. If you're thinking about going to the Netherlands, I would recommend listening to my chat with Steph about going abroad with your classics. I would recommend watching what we got up to, and if you've got any other questions about it, then I will absolutely try my best to get you some answers. But in the meantime, I hope you've enjoyed listening today. Drive safely and happy motoring.